credits for this video. I'm going to try to get as many of them in before this video goes up. I would just want to make it like super stupid long, but I couldn't find a lot, and I've already done one video of them, and Sean's done one, so we'll see. But I'm just going to jump right in. The first one is titled, When an Uncle Pranked a Murderer. To begin, I have tried to find this guy's name or reports about him, yet no one can remember it. My chair is so creaky. It occurred in the 1990s when I was a child. While this story is sort of a dark comedy in my family, among other stories. My uncle and aunt used to travel with the show when I was with a child, and when they came to our town, my parents and other relatives would come visit them. With the show, it's cash in hand work, and you simply turn up where the show owners decide if they want to hire you or not. There's no background checks, no ID checks, and some people work on the show for days, months, or even years. My uncle was a very likable worker and actually stayed on the show for 16 years. One week when my uncle and aunt were in town with the show, my parents and other relatives came to visit. Because I was a kid, I would just go play with my cousins and the other show children. While we were there, we encountered this weird guy who would distance himself from the rest of the adults, and I'm sure no one liked him. He was small for a guy and short, with a big head, often making the women especially uncomfortable. One day, when my uncle was putting up show rides and I was playing with the other children, one of the show owners told my uncle to do some pointless task, and my uncle just said, "Get effed." The show owner just walked off, mainly because he and my uncle were friends and he didn't care. And the weird guy, upon seeing this, asked my uncle why he didn't get knocked out for telling his boss off. And my uncle joked that whenever you don't want to do anything, just tell your boss to F off, and he won't do anything. After about 20 minutes later, we heard a scream and a thump, 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 and we find the show owner had the weird guy lifted off the ground by his neck, and he was punching him in the face. Every time the guy got punched, his head would thump into the building behind them. It turns out the weird guy had told the show owner to F off, expecting nothing to happen. Later on, my uncle, aunt, and my parents and their friends were drinking and laughing about the guy when the weird guy came back, screaming at my uncle that he was going to kill his family, hurt his wife, etc., etc. My uncle just laughed about it, but my dad and some other men hogtied him and put the weird guy back into his caravan. A few hours later, the guy who obviously escaped was walking down the street wearing a backpack. That same night, he was arrested. He was linked to 2 murders in another state, where victims were stabbed to death. Apparently, the police recognized his face while they saw him walking down the street, and when they took his backpack off of him, they found several types of knives, a rope, gloves, and etc., just like a kill kit. The thing with this guy is a lot of people on the show were making fun of him and constantly pranking him because they thought he was such a freak. It's creepy knowing he was one of those rejects who actually went around killing people. Number 2. When camping went horribly wrong. This happened to my parents back in the late 80s. They were in their mid-20s when all of this occurred. My parents decided to go camping in cool California. When they got there, it was kind of late. My mom was sitting down on a log, and my dad was unpacking the truck. While sitting down, she heard walking around the campsite, so she went and quietly told my dad she had heard something. And they noped right on out of there just in case. They drove about 3 miles down the road with their headlights off, so they wouldn't be followed. Once they got there, they set up camp and began to drink while listening to a boxing match on the radio. Eventually, they settled in for the night. Now, they don't know for sure what this next event is connected to the first, but they believe that it is. They settled in, and my dad was asleep far before my mom. My mom was in a halfway state where you're kind of halfway asleep, halfway awake. And suddenly she hears footsteps outside their tent. She abruptly snaps back to consciousness and listens. snapped out of it and she screamed, "Jim, get the shotgun. Kill that SOB." And with that, my dad finally woke up and they each heard snapping of twigs and footsteps and this guy running away. Of course, my parents didn't have a shotgun. It was a huge bluff, but it actually worked. My dad got up seconds later and began to run after him, but he was long gone. After that, my parents decided they were getting the heck out of there before anything else happened. When they saw that their tires were slashed, they were in the middle of nowhere, and they had no way out, with some maniac who wanted to kill them. They actually tried blowing up their tires with one of those things you used to like blow up a raft or an air mattress, but it didn't work, but they had to try, right? About an hour or so later, a ranger that was patrolling the area came along and helped them. He brought them back to town so they could get their tires fixed. While they were talking to the ranger, they found out that he had been searching for any suspicious activity due to recent murders nearby. My parents were likely the murderer's next victims. I tried finding some of the murder cases online, but I was unable to. Number 3. I'm 22, and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment. I was in the process of moving in. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed, so I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment, and I sat on the bed while opening the mail while talking on the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor, and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. And I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened, and I choked back the urge to scream. This person under my bed was lying there with his back towards me, his head to his chest so I couldn't see his face. And he didn't see me, so I was trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head. I picked up the phone and I said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna shower and call you right back." Now the bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in. I quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, and jumped out my window. My apartment is on the first floor, so I called the police and they told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anyone comes out the door to the apartment complex. This was the summer and it was still light out, so I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and entry door. I called my boyfriend and he came to me just before the police. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house, I was a mess, shivering and crying, told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to come out. "Can you?" No. Number 4. About a year ago, in my final semester in college, I worked at a department store in the mall. I didn't have a car yet, so I asked for day shifts because it was a 2-hour bus ride back home. So basically, if I had a closing shift, I'd get done at 11, but I wouldn't get home until 1. Sometimes I'd be given the closing shifts, much to my annoyance, since I had a 6:45 a.m. class, and my mother's worry because who wants their kid on public transport that late? Sometimes she would come and get me, but it'd be too much of a hassle to get my younger sisters out that late, and so much so I never asked her. My managers, being the jerks that they were, gave me a week of closing shifts, knowing my situation. I was mad, but whatever. I needed a job, right? One night, I had just finished my shift, got on the bus, I sat in the back, and I was minding my own business when my iPod died. I was annoyed, but I just kept my earbuds in and occupied myself by playing crossword on my phone. About 2 seats behind me, I hear these guys speaking Spanish. Now, my stepmother is Puerto Rican, so while I understand a fair bit of Spanish, I don't speak it. So I could hear them talking, but I don't really pay attention because it's rude to eavesdrop. And until they say, "Well, that black girl up there," Mom, can you please meet me at the bus stop? 5 minutes go by. No answer. We're getting closer to my stop, so I decide to call her. No answer. I call the house phone and she finally answers, and it's about 12:30, so she's asleep. I try to talk as cheerfully and calmly as I can, and this was our combo. Hey Mom, did you get my text? No, what's up? Oh, I sent you a picture of these jeans. I'm really gonna need to order online when I get home. I really need your opinion, so I really need you to look, because the sale ends at 1. She gets the hint that I need her to look at her cell, so I say goodbye, and I hope for the best. We get to my stop, and I see my mom's car, so I grab all my stuff and I hightail it off the bus. I don't even chance a look behind me to see if they're following me. I jump in the car, and I tell my mom to just go. I look in the rearview mirror, and I see the guys staring at the car. The next morning, I call my job, and I tell them I quit. No more public transport for me. Thanks to my stepmom for teaching me Spanish, and thanks to my mom for getting the hint. Number 5, this cemetery creeper. This past weekend, my soon-to-be wife Alexia and I had just settled down for a night of movies, pizza, and cuddling. We live in a residential area right outside of town. Our home is situated right across the street from a Presbyterian church with a large cemetery behind it. Most of our neighbors don't own pets, but there's one in particular across the street and down a little who owns perhaps the loudest, most annoying dog I've ever met. Oh, you, have my neighbors. Quite an annoyance on a night like tonight, but luckily it was quiet for the entire evening. It's around 10:15, and we're lying down watching a film in our living room when the loudest dog on earth begins to go off. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do except maybe confront our neighbor or file a noise complaint, but who wants to be the neighbor that does that? After about 5 minutes, I get off the couch and decide to walk over to our neighbor's home and say something about the dog. Sorry, I went too far. As I headed outside and made it to their driveway, unfortunately, I noticed the neighbor wasn't even at home. Their only car was not there. I decide anyway to walk up to the door and ring the bell. After a minute of no one answering, I give up and I head back towards home. I notice Alexia stepped outside and was looking on towards the direction of the parking. I told her no one was home and that we should either ignore it or finally file a complaint. No one should have to deal with a loud dog at night, especially if you're trying to unwind after a long day of work, or if you're trying to sleep. Alexia and I head back inside for a bit, and finally, after about 10 minutes, the dog stops barking. Alexia and I exhale and laugh a bit before continuing our film. But of course, not long after that, the dog starts up again. This time, it sounds vicious. I get up and I go outside and I approach our neighbor's fenced-off backyard, and I see the dog, who must have heard me or saw me coming. It actually stops barking and walks up to me and begins to pant in the way that cute dogs do. I chuckle and I say the dog's name, and he kind of looks me up and down and sits down. Such a good animal, even if he's so loud. And then I heard something that sounded like somebody walking through the leaves, coming from behind me and to the right. I turn around to see someone looking at me from behind a gravestone in the cemetery. The dog must have heard this as well, as it sprung up and began to bark in the direction of the gravestone. I looked on as the person continued staring in my direction, and as the dog myself to go into self-defense mode as I watched this man finally turn around and walk away towards the back of the cemetery and towards the woods. When the police finally arrived, the person was long gone, and I was stuck there explaining to a couple of skeptical officers about my encounter. They really didn't seem to take me that seriously, but they still investigated, as I explained to Alexia about the person I saw. When the police left after finding no trace of anyone, Alexia and I felt not that much better. We locked our doors and windows, and I decided to call our neighbors to fill them in on everything before heading back to continue our movie night in spectacular fashion with The Exorcist. Yeah, no. Okay. Let's see. This is a really long one. Okay, I'm gonna stop here for tonight, and I will pick back up soon. Okay, guys, our next story is titled The Man Across the Street. Alright, this happened to me about 3 years ago. It was brought up recently with my friends, and they suggested that I post it. I have gone through therapy for this and trained in firearms because this was the creepiest night of my life. I spent a night in what felt like a horror movie, and it is still so vivid. It was a Wednesday night in the summer. I was off work. My husband was out of town, and our son was staying at his grandma's for the night. I was home alone with my dogs, an 80-pound Aussie mix, and my 80-pound German Shepherd pit bull mix. I have always had issues sleeping when I am home alone, so I tend to just binge watch TV in the living room until I cannot keep my eyes open anymore. This particular night, I remembered that the trash pickup comes the next day. I decided to turn on Game of Thrones for a bit, and then I would take the trash out. All of a sudden, I realize it is 1:30 a.m., and I still have not taken the trash to the curb. My house has 2 solid iron gates. One on the front and one to the side door/backyard. The lighting on our street, or anywhere else in our neighborhood, isn't that great, but it's a quiet neighborhood with a lot of families, so you really don't hear about much crime happening here. I looked out the window by habit before I took the trash out, and I saw who I thought was my neighbor smoking a cigarette outside of his gate across the street. And he was looking directly at me. Now, for context, this is a pretty normal occurrence. My neighbor across the street hides smoking cigarettes from his wife, which I don't know how you could do that. We can smell it. So he typically does it late at night in front of his gate. Now, I get off work late, so I usually see him, and we wave, say hi, chat a little, and then I go inside, and he makes the joke, "You didn't see me smoking," if my wife asks. So, pretty unbothered by seeing the guy, I go outside, I grab my trash cans, I open my squeaky iron gate and take them to the curb. Now, I did not have my glasses on at the time, so, as usual, I waved and said hello. However, the guy, who I thought was my neighbor, threw down the cigarette and quickly walked away down the street. It took a minute for me to register he was not my neighbor. I was a little creeped out because he was clearly staring into my window from the opposite sidewalk. But also maybe it was a guy taking a night walk, not unusual in our neighborhood, and had just stopped for the cigarette. I thought I probably weirded him out as much as he weirded me out. I went back inside and laid on the couch with my dogs to keep watching Game of Thrones. At some point, I fell asleep, and I woke up hearing my gate squeak and my German Shepherd mix growling. He is extremely protective of our family at home, but he's also the kind of dog you can take anywhere because he's so friendly in public. My Aussie mix is a bit more passive, but his sheer size and scary bark tend to deter people. He's very friendly, though. I quickly got up and pulled back my curtain. My gate gate was still shut, and I didn't see anything. My dog, however, continued to growl at my front door. I looked out another window, which had a better view of my front yard and porch, and I didn't see anything. Eventually, my dog settled back down with my other dog, but I was still pretty uneasy. I ended up watching TV again because I couldn't fall back asleep. About an hour later, I definitely heard my gate squeak. We are the only ones with a heavy cast iron gate, and the noise it makes is so distinct. So I look out the curtain while my dogs are continuing to softly growl. My gate is halfway open, but I don't see anyone. At this point, I'm panicking. In my panic, I can't find my phone. I grab my wooden baseball bat out of our room. I crouch down and start going through the couch cushions to get my phone. My dogs are still quietly growling oddly instead of barking, so I assumed no one was there. But the minute I find my phone, my front door handle starts shaking. I run to the side door to let my German Shepherd out. I know he'll protect me, and he can jump the 6-foot back gate. My Aussie mix, going crazy, busts out one of our door side lights. I hear the guy say, "Oh," and I immediately let out my German Shepherd. I jump up to look out the window. I saw my dog latch onto the guy's hand. The guy starts screaming and takes off down the street with my dog chasing him. Suddenly, I become terrified he'll hurt my dog, so I run out with my baseball bat, screaming my dog's name over and over. The next thing I know, my dog is prancing down the street back to me, happy as a clam with blood all over his face. I call the police, and they take like another hour or so to show up, and they don't seem to take me too seriously. They said they would call the local hospitals, but I never heard back. I called my husband bawling, and he got on the next flight home. I stayed at his mom's for a few days, too terrified to go home, but I did buy my dogs giant ribeyes for being good boys and saving me. I don't know what the guy wanted, but since then I've been trained in firearms and self-defense. So, creepy guy, let's not meet, because my dog might finish what he started. It gave me the chills reading it because being robbed is like one of my number one fears. It scares the cojones out of me. Anyway, I'm gonna finish this off, I believe, with this super long story. I will see how long this video is and if I have to add any more. You might know this one. It is called "My Wife Has Been Peeking at Me from Around Corners and Behind Furniture," and it's gone from weird to terrifying. My wife Lynne and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and never once have I noticed any weird behaviors or red flags. So I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. Lynne is very kind, intelligent, and thoughtful. She's always been the no-nonsense type of person. Being childish or trying to scare me is not really something she would normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror, and she was so scared she didn't even make it through half of the movie before we had to turn it off. She isn't into anything creepy, and so she's never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea, and that's fine. And that's what's so strange about this. It's so unlike her. I should also add that she's never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware of, it doesn't run in her family. Now, I know some people are able to hide their mental health problems, but in the 6 years we've been together, strand of her long dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind the corner, and I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. I did burn the crap out of my lips. "Geez, Lynne," I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants. "You scared the crap out of me." She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurry off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. It was really weird and totally out of character for her, like I said, but I found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted I loved her and called her a weirdo, and as I shut the front door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was a bit odd, but certainly wasn't something to call a priest over, and I forgot about it by lunch. By the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she, and life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I'd woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of OJ in my hand, when I felt this strong feeling that I was being watched. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor, and I saw my wife's smiling face staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes and grinning. Grinning like the Cheshire Cat. I screamed. I admit it. Not out of irritation, but fear. For some reason, at that moment, I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynne scuttled backwards out of my view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. Oh, sorry, I went too far. I didn't run after her or even yell after her. I just stood there, frozen in shock, wondering what the heck had possessed her to do that. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynne was lying on her side, asleep, or at least pretending to be asleep. I stood for a while watching her breathe to be sure she was really asleep. I had this feeling that she might just jump out at me the moment I got into bed, but she didn't. I climbed into bed, and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I had just dreamt the whole thing. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. "What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. "You were peeking at me again, from over there," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. "You creep me out sometimes, you know that," I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even," she teased. We said our goodbyes, and I left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been, seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sounds that her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join in with me on my love of horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or the living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. And I might not have even known later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside that bathroom for well over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you, but joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with this crazy stuff anymore. That's when I kept telling myself as I paced the bathroom anyway, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly, I hear a muffled sound and I press my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynne just standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her own joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond furious at being made to feel scared in my own house and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. For what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. What the Lynne, I snapped. This is getting really annoying. I waited for her to apologize or call me a jerk, but instead I heard like a faint moan. So quiet I wondered if I heard it at all. And then complete silence. Lynne, I called out, not being able to hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. I swear to God, just freaking stop it, I yelled, pounding my fist on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I had never screamed at her before, but there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. Now, I won't deny, I was scared, too afraid to open the door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so, which feels like a lifetime when you're scared. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my own bathroom, so I got down on my knees and I peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thankfully, I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynne. I didn't know I should be happy about that or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. I stood up, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the knob, and I turned my head to the closet door. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped. Okay. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door as if slow motion, and I locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, her mouth hanging open in the most grotesque, gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too scared for that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling in sheer delight as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow, I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open, and I ran as fast as I could all the way down the steps. I snagged my keys and my phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter trailing behind me, but I couldn't hear her getting any closer. I didn't even bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have. Shivering the entire time, either from fear or from cold, maybe a little both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even shoes. I was still in my boxers and my hair was still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynne had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I'd gone and why I'd left like that. I threw my phone at the dash in a rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, and they told me to stay as long as I sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynne's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the freaking bathroom at all. Instead, she'd slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and I turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams, all of Lynne's smiling face. I woke up as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call her at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wasn't going to be home unless she gave her word she'd never do any more creepy stuff. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. I stared at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own, and her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks against the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she had been there quite a while. Possibly all night. I didn't bother screaming, though I was afraid. Anger trumped any fear I felt at that moment. I jumped up from the couch and I pounded my palm against the glass. "Lynne, are you crazy? What's wrong with you? Just go home now," I shouted. She didn't move. And in fact, her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs. As if Lynne could hear them from her place outside, her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynne was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all was the 2 streaks of drool dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see her watching me through the window, and they were skeptical. I mean, who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just like a slight indent. Animal, probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I had dreamt the entire episode. They didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day, and I turned my cell off. I didn't want to face Lynne. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I really started to believe that something was irreversibly wrong with her, that no matter what promises she'd made, we'd never be the same again, and the thought saddened me to my core. I cried most of the morning, but by noon I figured I was ready to confront her, to give her one last chance to explain. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw the dozens of texts that she'd sent, all from a seemingly concerned wife. "Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can't you answer? Just come home." And more of the same. All the texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home, how worried she was, but not a dang one addressing the crazy stuff that she'd pulled, like she hadn't been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. Even her texts were different. She normally texted novels, just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans? I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from this situation, but if you saw the way she'd looked at me, how she'd scampered away on all fours like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, then I think you'd find my reaction was pretty warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully I didn't see Lynne's face watching me from through the window. I don't want to pry because it's not my place, but is this fight something that can't be mended? sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming nosy. I don't know. It's like she's a different person, I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the crazy I had been dealing with. People change, Ben. She's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed, she said, ever the peacemaker. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her, I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and I loved my wife, but how could I live with someone like that? Living in constant fear did not sound very appealing. Lynne loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed, she said. I don't know about that, I said. Well, she certainly seems like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very much unlike the Lynne I knew, Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynne? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually, as if that fact wasn't nightmare fuel. And maybe for her, it wasn't. She stopped by this morning after Chris left for work, she said, cleaning the plates away from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Beck, what did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I looked around, examining the corners as if a predator lurked beneath them. No, she just asked if you were awake, and I said you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no, just to let you sleep, she said as she washed the dishes. That's it? She didn't say anything else? I asked. No. She looked awful, though, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should call her. I got up from the table, and I thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double-check that all the doors were locked. I sat for a while, trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt like I owed it to Lynne to help her if I could. Hadn't I sworn an oath to love and honor her through sickness and health? Clearly, she was sick. Very sick. And if she was sick, which I truly believe she was, I would have to try and get her the help that she needed, but I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the heck was I gonna tell them? My wife is peeking at me? That she's being creepy? As bizarre as she'd been, she still hadn't committed any crime. Well, not yet, anyway. The police probably would have said I was overreacting, but this wasn't some prank. It felt wrong. Dangerous, even. Like something sinister lurked beneath her smile. I knew as her husband, I was well within my rights to have her committed, but what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed. So I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to believe me. Her mother, Marianne, and I have never been on the best of terms. We'd never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a very warm person. Wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, her lips would move into a thin-lipped smile, leaving her eyes blank like before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the defensive. I'd only met her twice, and both were for really short visits. I got the impression she didn't approve of me for her daughter. Lynne always ushered us out quickly, as if she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, for which I was grateful. Being in her mother's company left me feeling almost unbearable, like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved 3 states away so we didn't have to see her often. I was happy to avoid the strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something. I was quickly interrupted. It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is it that you want from me? She asked. I could almost see her standing there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. I wanted to know if you noticed any odd behavior ever, or possibly mental health issues. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was just thinking or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but I don't find any humor in it, if so. Now, I do have business to attend to, as I've said, so if you don't mind, she said. But I cut her off before she could get rid of me. Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm seriously concerned about Lynne's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately, and I'm very worried for her. And I figured as her mother, you would be as well, I said, frustration evident in my voice. Well, if you're truly concerned, I suggest you get the health professionals involved. I don't know what you expect of me, she snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up. For some reason, I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling she knew a lot more than she was letting on. Please, if not for me, then do it for Lynne, I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath, as if she were trying to hold her steely persona together, but failing. Marianne, what's wrong? I started. Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye. I tried to call out to her, but she'd hung up. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help me. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to replay the conversation, desperate to find something I missed. And after a while, I almost gave up. Until I remembered her last words to me. Seek professional help. She had said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but I was sure her voice had changed ever so slightly when she said that, as if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to someone else. Someone she didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausting conversation with him and Rebecca, I had convinced them that Lynne truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't prepared to go into all that yet, but I told them about our last encounter, how she'd hidden in the bathroom, peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. They too just wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynne had to be playing some sort of weird joke. Maybe for YouTube, Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly, was the best recourse. And I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going into that house all alone. We drove over this morning just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second, I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat, but Chris was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets like he was going on a stroll through the park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too. He walked into the house behind me with his nose all scrunched up. What do you guys use to clean the floors around here? Poop, he mumbled. Shut up, I said, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynne. The house was deadly quiet and dark, despite it being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house was abandoned. We moved through each room some as large as a quarter, with some as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals, and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and I shuddered at the thought. Man, I thought I'd had it with Becca's shoe addiction, but your wife's in here collecting some eyeballs, Chris said, gagging. Ben, I think we should go, he called from the hall. I'm getting nauseous. All right, I grabbed my duffel and I shut the closet on my new nightmare. I stepped into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue and I couldn't help but gag. Who the heck lines eyeballs up in their closet like that? Chris mumbled. I tried to tell you she needed help, I said. She doesn't need help. She needs an exorcist, he said. Are you coming or what? I can't stand the smell, his words died in his throat. His eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. Christ, I whispered, as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew she'd been found, I heard the quiet noises she was making, a sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving, to say the least. Wide eyes and that same huge smile. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. Lynne, I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little movements as if she were nodding. Baby, I just want to help you, okay? Can you let me do that? I asked. I'd taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. I love you, Lynne, I said softly, taking another step closer. She let out another tiny moan despite her wide-open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it, and they trembled more the closer I got, as if she were barely able to contain herself. Lynne, are you hurt? You're bleeding. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood upon her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off of her was revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb up my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in the state she was in. I scooted closer and I reached out to her, and the excited hiccuping sounds got louder and her hands shook, fingers flexing, and it was then that I could see the blood oozing from between her fingers. My God, Lynne, you're Lynne, Chris said. You, playing hide and seek? I reached back and I pushed him towards the steps. Move your butt, Chris, I said as quietly but as firmly as I could. Lynne bobbed her head in sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open even wider and wider, so her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer, and then he was running down the steps. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. I only want to help, I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her. Then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over, and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 of them at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear so I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word.